98.1 KZE, good afternoon and welcome back. This is Will with you here for another installment of the Midweek Meet Up, a feature of the Afternoon Drive program where we take a deeper dive into matters facing our KZE community, our United States, and our world. And returning for the meetup, Vincent Martella from the Ulster County Department of Health and Mental Health. For much of what Vincent and I are going to cover, you can go to ulstercountyny.gov/health. That's ulstercountyny.gov/health. And today we're going to attempt to really zero in on one specific topic, and that is something that I hear in conversations all over the Hudson Valley, Northwest Connecticut, and the Berkshires. That is the ongoing heroin and opioid epidemic that has really caused so much heartbreak and devastation in our communities. Vincent, welcome to the program. Thank you for doing this today.
It's good to be back, Will. Yes, the opioid epidemic is very serious. There's not been a community that's not been impacted by it. Last year, over 59,000 Americans died from fatal drug overdoses. It's now the leading cause of death for Americans under 50.
Really?
So it's serious.
This is something that we, I think, sometimes have stereotypes, or we have preconceived notions about the kinds of people that are affected by drug addiction. And I think that the heroin and opioid epidemic has upended some of those notions.
Oh, for sure. I mean, certainly distressed, low socioeconomic status populations or neighborhoods are still, very much impacted. But this recent epidemic has cut across all socioeconomic strata. So literally, there's no one that's not been affected by it.
This really is top of mind for me right now. There is a story from News 10 ABC from just the other day. Headline, disturbing number of drug overdoses in the past 24 hours in Columbia County. I believe there were 6 overdoses. I believe 3 of them were fatal. This is touching our communities in such a huge way. The good news is it seems like there's an all hands on deck mentality that has developed in the last year or so.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, many communities, Ulster County, Dutchess County, have experienced double-digit overdoses, not necessarily deaths, but overdoses. Mm-hmm. And there are much more serious drugs out there. For instance, we all know about heroin, but
Sure.
Then it's being cut with a substance called fentanyl, which is a chemical substance that mimics heroin, except it's 100 times more powerful. And there's carfentanil, which is 5,000 times more powerful. Basically an elephant tranquilizer, so much so that a couple of grains can literally kill you. The police, when they go to a scene...
Grain, you're referencing like the size of a grain of sand.
Like you can barely see.
Yeah.
So much so that first responders and police that go to an overdose are really wary, because if they just touch it, it's so powerful that they
even
can
against
actually,
the skin.
Yeah, against the skin, or breathe like a particle of dust of this stuff, they can go into overdose shock and then have to be rescued themselves.
So these are drugs that are being cooked into
They come generally from China. They're very inexpensive. And so instead of buying the more expensive heroin, the drug dealers take a little bit of heroin, mix it with these drugs inexpensively, and then make more profit.
Can you, just to frame this conversation a little more, for those who don't know what an opioid, we hear that term a lot, but sometimes maybe we don't think about what it means.
Sure. Opioids are a class of chemicals, really, that bind to opioid receptors in the brain, and they simulate euphoria or pleasure. And so, they become very attractive on a very deep physiological level to people. So people think, well, I can just try a little bit. It usually starts with prescription drug abuse, opioid painkillers. I can just try it. And then what happens is people, they not slowly, slip into addiction.
Very quickly sometimes.
Yes, very
over
quickly.
A very short amount of time.
And I've talked to a lot of people who are struggling with addiction, and almost to a person, they all say, I never, in my wildest imagination, thought I would ever do heroin. But they thought, I'll start off with recreational drugs, do a little prescription painkiller drugs, and then try heroin. And then before they know it, boom, there they are.
This is something that we talked about a little bit. We touched on with State Senator Sue Serino when she was here for the Midweek Meetup. The impact on the creative community, on the music community that heroin and opioids have had is just devastating. Just to give you a very small sample of the artists that we have lost and the music that we have been robbed of, the creative spirit that we have
Yeah.
lost due to this epidemic. Frankie Lyman, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Tim Buckley, Graham Parsons, Lowell George, Mike Bloomfield, Alan Woody, just a small sample. There's an entire Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, most recently Prince, right?
Yes.
I mean,
that was a part in his death, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, one of the things is that these stars are high profile. You know, it resonates more in the culture. But, you know, pop culture glorifies drugs, as does our society in general, right? Because if you take all the sum total of all the advertising and marketing money for over-the-counter drugs and prescription drugs, it sends the message that whatever ails you or whatever life's tribulations may bring you, there's a drug for that. You know, so it's almost like no mystery that we have a drug problem in our culture.
Do you think that medical patients, people who are suffering from pain, maybe they're coming out of an important surgery that they had to have, do you think that they realize sometimes that they have options, not always, but that they have options beyond opioids? You can say to your doctor, "Doc, we have this history of addiction in my family. Is there something else that we can try?"
Well, the problem has been, at least, is that in the medical community, the mantra up until this recent epidemic has been, if your patient is feeling pain, you're not doing your job. So it's been a feel no pain kind of mantra. And
You see that changing?
Yes, it's changing for sure through education. And also we have a program in New York State called iStop, which is electronic prescriptions. Now all prescriptions go through electronically, and those are being flagged if there is a particular doctor that's prescribing too many opioids to a particular patient, or if that patient might be doctor shopping, you know, going from doctor to doctor trying to accumulate a number of these things. But I think in the medical community in general, you know, it's very high profile right now.
My guest this afternoon for the Midweek Meet Up on 98.1 KZE, Vincent Martella from the Ulster County Department of Health and Mental Health. For much of what Vin and I are covering, you can go to ulstercountyny.gov/health. And we are focusing this afternoon on the ongoing heroin and opioid addiction epidemic in our communities. What do you see, or do you see anything happening locally here that is helping to make a difference?
Oh, for sure. There are a lot of really positive things happening, Will. And really, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? Because the drug problem is both a supply problem, meaning drug dealers and illicit drugs coming into the country from everywhere, and that profit motive. But then there's also the demand side of the equation, right? So law enforcement's working really hard on the supply side, trying to, you know, stem the flow of drugs. But if there's still a demand, then it won't do anything. And so what we're trying to do is work in a prevention demand strategy to help educate kids. For instance, we have a collaboration council called Ulster Prevention Council. And every 2 years for the last 10 years, we've done anonymous surveys of every middle and high school student in Ulster County on their attitude towards drugs and their usage of drugs. And we use that data to shape our strategy. So that's just one of the things that we do. We also have a family advocate in Ulster County whose job it is, like say an individual or family encounters a drug crisis. All of a sudden someone in the family is undergoing substance abuse challenge. Where do they turn? It becomes a crisis for them. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of manuals on how to deal with this.
Yes.
But there is a lot of help. I think there's more help than most people realize. And these are our tax dollars at work.
Yeah, and so the family advocate, her name is Carol Sutcliffe, and her number is 845-458-7455. It's her job to walk people through the whole process, find the right treatment, the right rehabilitation, and advocate with their insurance companies. We're also doing community forums at the invitation of school superintendents throughout Ulster County, where we're bringing in panels of experts. We're bringing in people and families that have actually been through the addiction crisis and emerged on the other side of it to tell their stories, to help people with providers right at those forums so people can get more information. That's been tremendously successful. We have a program in Woodstock with the Woodstock Police Department. It's called Police Assisted Recovery.
Okay.
And what you can do is, and it started in Massachusetts, basically you can walk into the police station, and as long as you don't have any outstanding warrants or you're not a major drug dealer, but if you're addicted and you're struggling, you go in and you're guaranteed not only to not get arrested, but they have someone assigned to hook you up with a trained volunteer that will direct you to a rehabilitation recovery program. We also have a pharmacy take-back initiative, which just passed in New York.
This is something I first learned about from you, and there has been some real progress here. This, to me, seems like such a no-brainer, common sense, not solution, but something that will seriously help the problem.
Well, here's why. Because 90% of heroin addicts started with prescription drug abuse, right? And over 50% of the drugs on our streets, highly addictive drugs, come from people's medicine cabinets because they have unused opioid medications or they were overprescribed and now they're sitting there and then they end up falling into the wrong hands. So the logical thing to do is to be able to take them back to the very same pharmacy that you purchased them. But up until about a year and a half,
what have we been doing?
It wasn't possible. You could only do that at police stations, which is not the
Just doesn't make a
no,
lot
it's
of
not
sense.
the place. So, we've been working on the issue for a long time, but in the closing moments of the New York State Legislature this session, just a couple of weeks, maybe last week actually, they passed in the final moments a law that requires chain pharmacies in New York to set up take-back options for customers at no charge, which really is going to get a tremendous number of these drugs off the streets.
Do you think that we can put positive pressure on the businesses, whether they're local independent businesses or they're chain pharmacies? Do you think that we can, as consumers, put positive pressure on them to reward them when they do the right thing?
Absolutely. For instance, CVS, about a year and a half ago, took it upon themselves to stop selling tobacco products. The leading cause of premature death and disease in the United States, kills over 500,000 Americans every year. They decided, they took a $2 billion hit to their bottom line to say, we're just not going to do this anymore. I, for one, wrote a letter to the CEO saying that I will never shop anywhere else again because it's such a bold move,
Yeah,
and
that kind of loyalty, customer loyalty, I think matters to these corporations. Now, what about local independent pharmacies? Are they set up? Can they take part in this initiative if they choose to?
They don't have to. They can.
But they can choose to.
Yes, they can.
And if your local independent pharmacy chooses to get involved in this program, perhaps you should let them know how much you appreciate it.
Yes, and they can contact us too because we have an entire how-to guide for local pharmacies on how to put together a program and where to get the supplies and so on. It has to be done under pretty strict DEA regulations.
Of course.
But pharmacies are used to handling controlled substances.
But Ulster County can assist, or the state government can assist with that.
We can point them in the right direction and get them what they need to do to be up and running. And basically, it only is about $5,000 a year to set up a program. And really, it's a customer convenience. It's tremendously helping the community. And they're getting repeat business. Customers are coming in.
Yeah. My guest this afternoon for the Midweek Meet Up on 98.1 KZE, Vincent Martella from the Ulster County Department of Health and Mental Health. For much of what we are covering today, you can go to ulstercountyny.gov/health. I want to wrap up with just a couple key points surrounding the ongoing heroin and opioid epidemic that we are discussing here today. I am concerned that this is a moment where we can really shift the conversation about drugs and drug addiction in America, and I don't want to lose that moment. We have tried now for 30, 40 years to incarcerate our way, to punish our way out of this problem.
We can't do that. I mean, that's a key to stem the supply of drugs by going after the big drug dealers. But addiction is an illness. And just like any other illness, it needs to be treated properly and dealt with properly.
My concern is so much for the law enforcement officers who are at the tip of the spear.
Yeah, they're dealing with the consequences of our...
We're putting them in this unsustainable, untenable situation where we have this public health crisis that we have turned into a criminal justice crisis.
And the other part of it, Will, is honestly, we have to stop glorifying drugs as the answer to everything. Maybe in the mobile phone world, there's an app for that, but to have a notion that there's an app, there's a drug for everything. There's a drug for that. For the inevitable, ups and downs of life, it's ridiculous. Can only cause tragedy and problems.
We've got to squeeze in one more issue here because this is so important. We know that there's a debate going on surrounding healthcare reform in the United States as we speak. There are proposed massive cuts to Medicaid. Will that have an impact?
Absolutely, because it's proposed to cut out mental health services, substance abuse treatment services.
Particularly in rural communities, as I understand it.
Rural communities and rural hospitals will really be impacted.
And these are the same communities that are being so heavily affected by the epidemic.
Yeah, because people will be walking into emergency rooms without any insurance and without any coverage, and the rural hospitals will have no choice but to treat them. They can't just leave them there and without getting paid. And they're already struggling financially. So it really is not a wise strategy by any way, shape, or form. It's just not going to work. Luckily, our local leaders are on it. Our county executive, Mike Hine, is very strongly opposed to it and helping us in all of our tremendous efforts on prevention.
That is an important thing that we can circle back to, is there is help out there, and there are more resources than I think most people realize.
Yes. I can say, I work for Ulster County, obviously, but I can say that our community, not just our government, is tremendous. You go to one of our community forums, you will see, you can't come out of those forums without feeling that this community has got your back if you're encountering a problem.
Well, Vincent Martella, I want to thank you so much for stopping by and being our guest on the Midweek Meet Up, a feature of the Afternoon Drive program where we take a deeper dive into matters facing our KZE community, our United States, and our world. Vincent Martella from the Ulster County Department of Health and Mental Health. Best of luck with your work, and hopefully we get to see you down the road.
Great. Thanks, Will. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Vincent. 98.1 KZE.